Good afternoon. My name is Sally Swenson, and I work with the ESRI training team here in Redlands, California. I want to welcome you all to today's live training seminar, Migrating to VisualBasic.net. Joining me today to assist with your questions is Kelly Hutchins from the ESRI Developer Support Group. As we begin, let's look at the topics that we'll be covering today. We'll start by migrating a Visual Basic 6 application into VB.net, and we'll look at some of the reasons that you and other developers have opted to make this migration. In our second topic, we'll look at some tricky situations, such as error conditions or syntax that you might encounter in VB.net, and give you some tips for how to resolve them. In our final topic, we'll talk about how to deploy a VB.net application in the sense of what are the basics for distributing this application to client machines. After each topic, the seminar will be open to questions. Along the way, I'll make 2 software demonstrations that will step you through the creation of a VisualBasic.net ArcGIS application and bringing across some Visual Basic code from an existing application. And now, let's begin by looking at some of the reasons that you and other developers are moving to VB.net. Before we begin, though, let's find out specifically why you are moving your ArcGIS Visual Basic 6 applications to VB.net. Are you already using VisualBasic.net for other reasons? Do you view VB.net as providing better performance or serving as a better product? Are you unable to purchase Visual Basic 6? It's also possible that your application design just requires .NET functionality. Choose the option that best matches your reason for moving your ArcGIS Visual Basic 6 applications to VB.net and send us your answer using the box in the lower right corner of the screen. I'll report the poll results after we've looked at why other developers have moved to VB.net. Well, let's look at some of these reasons that I've alluded to. Application requirements, whether they are related to technology, cost, or even language options, are always a major factor. You and other developers may find that you no longer need to use the Windows API because the built-in class library provides much of that same functionality. The integrated help is readily available, and unlike Visual Basic 6, VB.net is fully object-oriented. If you can't buy Visual Basic 6, you might be surprised to learn that it actually is still available. One option is to purchase from Microsoft as a downgrade when you purchase VisualBasic.net. Or, if you don't need all of the Visual Studio functionality and would like Visual Basic as a standalone product, you can purchase from other vendors. For purchase information, refer to the ESRI technical article that is shown here on your screen. Are you under the impression that ESRI requires that you migrate your applications to VB.net? In actuality, for ArcGIS development, ESRI requires only that you choose a language that supports COM. .NET is just one of those options. In many cases, Visual Basic 6 may still be the best tool for the job. Here are some other reasons for making the move. Arc Web Services gives you the capability of introducing GIS content and functionality without hosting the data into your applications. You can create an ArcGIS object such as a property page to act as a dialog, plug into the framework, and then access the web service from ArcObjects. More flexible debugging is another reason that many developers have made the move. In Visual Basic 6, debugging was limited and ran out of process. Remember how you needed to add your command to the ArcMap or ArcCatalog interface before you could use the debugger? With .NET, you'll be able to debug your custom extensions that you've created for ArcMap or ArcCatalog. The new dock and anchor properties make it easier for you to manipulate the runtime, size, and position of Windows Forms controls that you've incorporated into your custom applications. And now let's find out why you have made the move. About 1/4 of you are already using VB.NET, probably for some of its new functionality. Half of you, though, indicate that you view VB.NET as offering better performance or being a better product. And the remainder of you are split between being unable to purchase Visual Basic 6 or application requirements do dictate that you move to .NET. Thank you for participating, and let's continue with the presentation. For those of you who might still be in the planning stages, let's take a look at the installation requirements. You'll need Visual Studio.NET version 2002, which is the version I use, or 2003. During the installation, you can opt to install the Visual Basic.NET components only, or for additional functionalities, choose C++ and C#. You'll need ArcGIS, of course, and the ESRI ArcObjects.NET Developer Kit that contains all the necessary files for ArcObjects development. Well, once you've installed, what do you need to do to get started? Remember, at Visual Basic 6 and ArcObjects, you needed to add a reference to the ESRI object library before you were able to write ArcObjects code. With VB.NET and ArcObjects, you'll need to add assemblies before you can continue with your ArcObjects development. Assemblies are the building blocks of the .NET framework. They can be executables or DLLs, and they are the libraries that you need for development. The ESRI assemblies reside in the ArcGIS installation folder in the ArcObjects Developer Kit subdirectory. Always ensure that you access ESRI assemblies from this .NET Assemblies folder. Once you begin developing your application, you'll probably find that the first assembly you use is ESRI ArcObjects Core. Once you've added your assemblies, you'll create directives using an imports statement. Once you've done this, you'll be able to use shortcut assembly references in your code. This is analogous to using the ESRI Core library reference in your Visual Basic 6 ArcObjects applications. And as you can see in the table, each of the ESRI assemblies is associated with an ESRI type library. Let's take a look at the ESRI add-ins. Again, at Visual Basic 6 and ArcObjects, ESRI provided you with a number of add-ins. These were designed to help streamline your workflow. The interface implementer that comes with ArcObjects for .NET is somewhat like the interface implementer that you used in Visual Basic 6. It stubs out the wrapper lines for your implementation code. For those of you developing with Visual Studio.NET 2003, you can omit any reference to this particular add-in because the implementation code will automatically be stubbed out when you press Enter on the Implements line. The Component Category Registrar add-in for .NET and ArcObjects is comparable to the Component Category Registration add-in for Visual Basic 6. This automates the process for registering with component categories. And you'll find that something new is available with .NET. And now let me begin the first software demonstration. I'll begin by restoring the .NET environment. I'd actually started it before beginning the presentation. Notice the tabbed document interface, and to make a little more room for me to navigate, I'll close some of the existing windows. Here's a quick peek at the dynamic help before I close it. I'll begin on the Start pane by clicking New Project. In this demonstration, I'll take you through the steps from beginning a project to introducing the functionality that you need for ArcObjects development. While I'm in this first dialog, I'll leave project types set to Visual Basic Projects. Notice the other references that I have. Depending on your installation decisions, your configuration here may appear differently. From the templates, I'll select a class library, and I'll give it a name at this time. A subdirectory with this name will be created in the location shown here. I'll click OK to continue, and it looks like I left a little straggler from earlier. Let me call this one Project 3 for our 3 o'clock start time. And as you see, I've opened up .NET and we're sitting in a public class. Let's take a look in the object browser where you can see the libraries that are already loaded. I'll be making a couple of references later on to the system library that you see here. Let me return to the class, and also let me open the Solution Explorer so you can see how the project is organized. The Solution Explorer is somewhat like the Project Explorer that you saw in Visual Basic. Here's the name of my project. Here's another look at the references that are automatically loaded. You can see here something with the keyword assembly. This particular file contains version information about the assembly that we're creating. Yes, instead of calling it a DLL, we now call it an assembly. Here's another reference to the class that I just opened. And down below is the Properties window with properties that I can view or set for my classes or other controls. As you begin your application development, there's one customization you might want to do at the beginning. You'd access this from the Tools menu and Options. You can actually manage how you start your applications. I began on the Start page, but you can choose from among a few other options to help customize as you're developing. Let me click Cancel here to close that dialog. Now that I'm sitting in the .NET environment, I'm now ready to begin my COM development. To begin, I need to right-click on the project in the Solution Explorer. I'll point to Add, and then select Add New Item. When the dialog appears, I'll leave the category set to Local Project Items. Then from the templates, I'll scroll down until I find the COM class, and you might recognize the icon from other presentations. At this time, I'll name that class, and I'll click Open to continue. Notice that another reference has been added to the Solution Explorer. Now that I have a COM class, I'll no longer need the class that opened initially by default, and I'll right-click on it to delete it and remove it from the Solution Explorer. Let me show you something else to indicate that I know I'm in a COM class. Once again, I'll right-click on the project, this time to display its properties, and when the dialog appears, I'll open the Configuration Properties folder, then click Build. Notice the checkbox next to Register for COM Interop. This is basically giving me a shortcut indication that the compiler knows how to deal with my COM component. I'll click Cancel to close that dialog, and let me close these windows to give you a better look at the code editor. The first line contains the name of my class, and this is the class declaration. Beneath that is a public class. Notice the wavy underline. There is a syntax error at the moment, but that will be corrected when I introduce the implementation code. Here's a collapsible region for COM GUIDs, and when I open that, notice that you actually see some GUID references. The first is for my class, the second for the default inbound interface, and the third for the default outbound interface. Notice that these GUIDs are now created in code rather than at compile time as they were with Visual Basic 6. I've collapsed the region so you can get a better look at the class constructor that's equivalent to class initialize from Visual Basic 6. Let me continue now with the actual ArcObjects portion of the development here. From the View menu, once again, I'll open the Project Explorer. Now I'm ready to add assemblies. I need to add the assemblies first so I can begin using ArcObjects code. Again, I'll right-click on the project, select Add Reference, and when the dialog appears, I want to make sure that the .NET tab is selected. I'll scroll down to the ESRI assemblies, and if you recall from the presentation, I indicated that the first assembly reference will probably be ESRI ArcObjects Core, and that's the first one I select. An entry is made in the bottom portion of the window, and I can scroll down to another assembly that I want to add. This one has to do with component category registration. Again, I'll select it. An entry will be made in the bottom panel. The Visual Basic 6 ArcObjects application that I'll be migrating over to .NET implements iCommand. And for a command, I'll want a bitmap to appear as the icon in Arc Catalog. I'll need another assembly reference in order to create my bitmap. Let me scroll down once again, and this time I'll select the System Drawing Assembly. Let me widen that source column so you can see where these assemblies are located on disk. The first two assemblies come from the ESRI.NET Assemblies folder, and the third assembly comes from Microsoft. I'll click OK to continue. Notice that 3 more references were added in the Solution Explorer. So here are the references for my assemblies, and I'll collapse those references in order to move on. Also, I'll close that Solution Explorer and move back into the code editor. Now that I've added the assemblies, I need to create directives. I'll insert the directives just above the class declaration. I'll begin with the imports keyword, and the first reference that I want to add is for ESRI ArcObjects. Notice that I've intentionally omitted a reference here to the keyword core. I'll be using core later on as the shortcut assembly reference for my objects. Let me create a second directive, also for ESRI, and I'll use the code completer to help me out here. And finally, a third directory for System Runtime Interop Services. This is used for component category registration and is a commonly used reference throughout .NET development. In fact, I'll make reference to this one later on during the presentation. Now that I have the directives in place, I'm ready to introduce the implementation code. I could choose to type it in manually, but that would take a long time and probably would be prone to errors. I'll opt for using the ESRI add-in, which I access from the Tools menu, and then click Interface Implementer. When the dialog appears, I want to make sure that ESRI ArcObjects Core appears as a referenced assembly, and then in the bottom text box I can search for iCommand. I'll click OK to continue. Notice that an implements line for iCommand has been added, and that has remedied the syntax error for the public class. Let me scroll down to another collapsible region. This one contains the implementation code for the members of iCommand. I'll collapse that region so you can see what it looks like, and then let me expand it again because I'll need to add code to the implementations. I'd like to make one more change for ArcObjects while I'm in the code editor. I'll position my cursor beneath COM GUIDs. I only want to make sure that the cursor is positioned in a good location and not inside the class constructor or inside any of the implementation code. I'm now ready to introduce the component category registration. Again, I'll use an ESRI add-in. From the Tools menu, I'll click ESRI Component Category Registrar, and when the dialog appears, I'll scroll down, make sure that the reference to MX command is checked, and I'll click OK. Notice that another collapsible region has been added in the code editor. This one handles the self-registration for the desired component category, in this case ESRI MX commands. Let me collapse that region, and I'll scroll back up to the code window. Let's review what you just saw in this first demonstration. I opened a new Visual Basic.NET application and named the project at that time. I added a COM class and named it. Then I added an assembly reference. Actually, I added 3 assembly references and the appropriate directives. Once the directives were in place, I used an ESRI add-in to create the implementation code and followed that with a second add-in to write the code for component category registration. I'll now minimize the .NET environment, and later we'll pick up right where we left off. Now let's return to the presentation and review what we covered in this first topic. We discussed why you and other developers have chosen to move your Visual Basic 6 ArcObjects applications to VB.NET. We talked about installation requirements and then looked at the necessary assemblies and directives that you need to add to your projects. I took advantage of ESRI add-ins to automate some of my code creation, and you watched me step through the beginnings of creating an ArcObjects Visual Basic.NET application. Now, a number of questions have come in already. Some are related to material we'll be covering in the next topic. So let me turn to Kelly Hutchins, who might deal with the questions for this initial topic. Kelly?
Okay. Paula in Washington has a question about performance in .NET. She wants to know if it performs better than VB6. Well, all of your ArcObjects.NET code has to go through an interop layer. So there's an extra layer that everything has to be translated through, which can lead to a little bit of a performance issue. If you're very concerned about performance and you don't need the advanced features in .NET, then you may be better off sticking with Visual Basic 6.0 for your ArcObjects customizations. Tim in Boston asks, how long will ESRI support VB6 in ArcGIS for development? That's a great question. ESRI has no plans to discontinue support for Visual Basic 6 with ArcObjects development. As we learned in the last question, Visual Basic 6 may be the best choice for your development. And Jeff in San Antonio wants to know what version of Visual Basic.NET is required to build ArcObjects applications. There is a chart available to you in Visual Studio.NET. If you search the help for Visual Studio.NET Editions, A chart will appear listing the functionality available in the versions Professional, Enterprise Developer, Enterprise Architect, and Academic. You can choose one of those versions depending on the functionality that you need. Any of those versions would be appropriate for working with ArcObjects. There is one additional version called Visual Basic Standard Edition. This version is not appropriate for working with ArcObjects because you cannot use it to create DLLs, which means you wouldn't be able to create custom extensions or toolbars or commands. Okay, let's go back to Sally.
Thank you, Kelly. We've had a couple of questions come in that are related to .NET and VBA. Someone has asked whether it's necessary to learn VB.NET in order to be able to use Visual Basic for applications. Actually, no. It's better just to work in the VBA environment and become familiar with the VBA syntax, either VBA alone or VBA in conjunctions with ArcObjects development. The second part of that question has to do with Visual Studio.NET for Office and whether VBA will go away. Actually not. VBA is going to be around for a while. It's actually embedded in a number of applications, Microsoft Office, as well as ArcGIS. So you'll be able to continue with VBA development in ArcGIS. Well, now let's continue with our second topic. This go-around, we'll look at some of the tricky situations that you might encounter in .NET, and we'll talk about ways that you can work around or resolve these issues. Let's begin with the option statements. In Visual Basic 6, you might have set option explicit on in order to require variable declaration, ultimately to avoid a lot of syntax errors. In VB.NET, option explicit is on by default. VB.NET also uses the option strict statements. Option strict off allows narrowing conversions. These result in loss of data, such as when you convert from a double value to an integer. The downside of that is that .NET gives you no warning or error condition indicating that you're losing data. Option strict on the other hand, prevents narrowing conversions. You can write code to force a narrowing conversion by using the C-type expression. If you don't use C-type, you will receive an error as you are writing the code, and again when you build if you haven't changed the syntax. We recommend that you work with option strict on in order to ensure type safety in your code. The option strict statements also affect query interface. With option strict off, you can write code to call query interface in much the same manner as you wrote Visual Basic 6 and ArcObjects code. However, with option strict on, that same syntax will fail as you are writing the code and again when you attempt to build. You can query interface using option strict on by casting your object using the C-type expression. And again, we highly recommend that you work with option strict on. What about errors in VB.NET? There are actually some sneaky errors in VB.NET. These occur at runtime and give you no error or warning pop-up to tell you that there's a problem. For example, the code for handling embedded resources is case sensitive. An embedded resource is a bitmap or another icon that you actually want to include in your application. If you don't trap for errors, your code may work or seem like it's working, but is actually failing. You'll want to trap for errors in VB.NET just as you trapped for errors in Visual Basic 6. In VB6, though, you probably used on-error go-to syntax. This is also supported by VisualBasic.net, but can degrade performance. In .NET, exception handling is preferred. You can trap for a number of exceptions, and the most general of these exceptions is just called exception. If you want also to trap for COM errors, you'll want to create a directive for System Runtime Interop Services. General errors, though, are in the System class, which is automatically loaded into your application. In the case of the embedded resource example, you can write code to trap for your error using try, catch, finally syntax. When the code fails in the try block, the catch block will capture the exception, and you can report one or more of the properties to give you a clue as to the type of error. Notice here that I took advantage of Visual Basic 6 syntax and used a message box for reporting the error. I was able to do this because .NET provides a number of compatibility tools to help VB developers avoid syntax errors as they're moving their code into VB.NET. Do become familiar, though, with the .NET equivalents for these VB tools to avoid becoming too dependent on these tools. Be sure to update your code. Microsoft indicates that these Visual Basic 6 compatibility tools won't be around forever. Let's look at one more change. With VB.NET, the data type variant has gone away. Everything is now an object. You may have worked with variants in Visual Basic 6 without really knowing it. For example, in multiple one-line declarations of the same data type, only the first variable assumed the desired data type, and the others became variants. In VB.NET, these multiple one-line declarations assign the same data type to all of the variables. This is advantageous to you in that no memory is wasted on variants, and you're now assured of the correct data type. Let's move on and look at how you can release memory from your objects in .NET. Most of the time you don't need to worry about freeing memory, but when you develop in COM, you do. Garbage collection is VB.NET's form of memory management. When you set an object equal to nothing, the object isn't actually released at that time, you've merely set a flag. Then you need to tell the system when you actually want the memory to be freed. To do this, you'll need to create a directive for System Runtime Interop Services. We've seen references to this earlier, and now you will be accessing its Marshal class. You'll call release COM object, which decrements the reference counter and returns the new reference count. Call release COM object in the method that uses your object. Because there can be multiple references to an object, you'll want to call release COM object in a loop until the new reference count is 0, as illustrated here by the variable called ival. And now let's review a few of the changes between the two environments, plus a couple that we haven't had time to introduce. The set keyword is gone. Because everything is an object, you no longer need to make a distinction in your code between data types and objects. Thus, you don't need to worry about whether to use the set keyword or not. Option explicit is on by default, and VB.NET also uses the option strict statement. A DLL is now an assembly, and your Visual Basic 6 class module is now a COM class. Formerly, your GUID was created at compile time, and as you saw during the demonstration, your GUID is now created in code. Exception handling is the preferred technique for trapping errors, And when you use the VB.NET debugger, you'll call debug.writeLine. Class initialize and class terminate are now the class constructor and the class destructor. Visual Basic 6 called class terminate when the last reference to an object was released. That sometimes led to conflicts preventing other objects from terminating. Class destructor now handles that for you, but be careful that you do not call class destructor explicitly in your code. Let garbage collection take care of that for you. And now I'll restore the .NET window and resume the application that we started developing earlier. Remember, I added assemblies, directives, and the implementation code, and now I'm ready to port over or migrate my Visual Basic 6 code. I've already copied my VB files to this machine to make them easier to access. Let me open the Solution Explorer, and I can actually add my VB6 code into this application. Let me right-click on the project, point to Add, and then select Add Existing Item. When the dialog appears, I'll change Files of Type to All Files, and then I'll navigate to the location on disk where I've saved my Visual Basic 6 code. I'll open the VB6 class module, and you'll see that a new reference is added in the Solution Explorer. Notice that my VB6 code actually has a CLS extension indicating a class module, yet my .NET references have a file extension of VB. In reality, .NET is merely treating this Visual Basic 6 code as text. To make it easier for you to follow along, I've actually included VB6 in the name for my Visual Basic 6 class module. Let me double-click on that, and a new tab is added to the code editor. I'll be using these tabs to navigate between the two pieces of code. Notice that the VB6 code looks like it would if I would have opened this in a text editor. There are also several lines of syntax errors, indicating also that .NET views this as unexecutable code. But let me review my VB6 code to become familiar with what I'm going to do next. Here's a reference to option explicit. I see my private declarations that will need to migrate, the implement statement, class initialize, class terminate, and the implementation code for the properties of iCommand. Let me go back up to the top and begin the migration. First, I'll copy the private variables, go back to my Visual Basic.NET code, and paste those 3 lines just below the implements line. Let me insert a blank line to make this a little more readable. There are some syntax errors, and I'll handle those in a minute. Next, I'll return to .NET, actually to the VB side, and let me grab the conditional expression that I've used for my enabled property. I used that rather than an explicit Boolean, true or false. Let me return to .NET. I'll take advantage of the class name and method pull-downs to navigate to the enabled property, and I'll paste in that code for the return value for enabled. Let me scroll down to see what else I need to look at. Here's the checked property. I know that my command also uses false for the checked property, so I can leave this set to its default value. But I do want to use the same name that I used in VB6. Once again, I'll return to the VB6 code and scroll down to that text string that I used for the name property. I'll copy that, return to .NET, and paste that value in for the return value. For convenience, and to save a little bit of time during the software demonstration, I'll use that same text string for the caption, the tooltip, and the message. The next properties are related to help. I have no custom help, so I can leave them set to their default properties. I won't have time to illustrate the bitmap implementation code, but you can find a sample for that in the walkthroughs in ArcObjects Online. Let me continue to the category property. Once again, return to Visual Basic and scroll down until I find that text string. I'll copy that and paste it in so that when I'm ready to add my command ArcMap, this will show up in component categories. I've completed migrating all of the properties. That probably saved me a little bit of time, so I didn't have to type or make some mistakes bringing that code over. Now I still have the two slightly larger pieces for the methods. I'll return to .NET, and the first method I'll look at is onCreate. Notice the two lines of code with the set keywords returning references to the hook and IMX document. I'll copy that code, return to .NET, once again use the class name and method pull-downs to navigate correctly, and then I'll paste in my code in the onCreate method. What happened here? Did you notice that the set keyword disappeared? Even when I attempt to use set in .NET, the system removes it for me. One more piece of code, and then we will have completed our migration to .NET. I'll copy the code for onClick. Notice that there are two lines here with the set keyword. Let me return to .NET. I'll paste in those lines, and once again the set keyword is gone. I'll make a final visit to the Visual Basic 6 code. Even though this looks like text, .NET will try to compile it. I could remove the class, but I'll just select all of the lines of code and comment them so they're here for quick reference in case I need to double check. Let me return to .NET, and now I see syntax errors related to ESRI core. Let me remedy those from the Edit menu and a Find and Replace, replacing in my files. I want to replace all references to that old Visual Basic 6 ArcObjects reference to ESRI core and replace those with the new assembly shortcut reference core. I'll change everything in the current document and I'll click Replace All. 4 changes were made, and when I click OK, I can see the Find Results window. That gives me a little boost by showing me the 4 lines that were changed. These look correct. I'm happy with the changes, so I'll close the Find Results window, scroll back up to the top of my class, and see that I still have a syntax error for the bitmap. Remember, in the first software demonstration I added a reference to the system drawing assembly. I needed that for my bitmap reference, and now that I've entered that, the final syntax error has been cleared. Next, I want to open the Solution Explorer once again and actually add my bitmap into the application. I'll right-click on the project, point to Add, once again Add Existing Item, and when the dialog appears, change Files of Type to Image Files and navigate to the location on disk where I stored my icon. Here's my bitmap. I'll click Open. Notice that a new reference has been added to the Solution Explorer. Let me look at the properties. I'll right-click to bring up the Properties window. I'll scroll to the top, and I want to change the Build action to Embedded Resource. Remember, during the topic on error handling, I mentioned that the code that deals with embedded resources is case sensitive. So the 2 text strings that you'll need to be on the alert for are the name of the bitmap and the name of the project. Once again, I'll return to the code window, and now I'm ready to save. I'll click Save All. Everything saved correctly. There was no pop-up for Save As, though. Remember, when I began the project, I named both the project and the class when they were created, so there's nothing left that's unnamed. From the Build menu, I'll select Build Solution, and instead of making a DLL, I've now created an assembly. The build was successful, and during the messages that moved across the screen, I see a reference here to COM interop. That's just a reminder that the compiler knew how to handle my COM component. That concludes the second software demonstration, where you watched me migrate some existing Visual Basic 6 code into a .NET application by using the low-tech copy and paste. I'll minimize .NET, and now we'll return to review what we covered in this topic. We talked about the option strict statements and how they can affect your code. We looked at exception handling as the preferred technique for trapping errors in .NET. We talked about memory management and garbage collection, and we compared and contrasted the Visual Basic 6 and the VB.NET environments. And now I'll ask Kelly to pick up where she left off with some questions.
Okay, it looks like we have lots of good questions. Brent noticed that in the tutorials, the walkthroughs on ArcGIS Online, the component category registration is different. It sends the MX command GUIDs in a different way. Which way is better, or are they identical? That's an excellent question. They are identical as far as better or worse. Neither one is better than the other. However, the method that Sally showed you, using the ESRI, ArcObjects, samples, cat IDs assembly, is simpler. Therefore, it's less error prone, so it's probably a little bit of a safer approach. Will from Australia wants to know if we can quickly re-explain the QI problem when the option strict is on. That's a good question because this is a really important topic. If you have option strict turned on, Visual Studio.NET is going to enforce type safety. Therefore, you can't simply query interface by setting, for example, a feature layer to a layer. You have an I layer and an I feature layer. You need to explicitly tell .NET that you want to cast from your layer to your feature layer. The way you do this is using C-type. C-type requires two pieces of information. The first is the variable that you want to convert, and the second is the type that you want to convert it to. Ewan from Sydney asks, how do you install your .NET application on a machine that does not have any of the .NET assemblies on it? Well, first of all, you have to install the .NET framework. The .NET framework brings with it the .NET base class libraries. You also need to install the ArcObjects Developer Kit for .NET so that you get access to the ESRI provided assemblies. Let me turn it back to Sally now.
We have one question asking for a little more help on where to find the bitmap code. There are actually several lines that you need to include. It isn't just a simple return value for the implementation code for the bitmap. You can actually find these in ArcObjects Online, and we have provided for you a number of what are called walkthroughs. This is the new terminology for samples. So if you just visit ArcObjects Online and you look for those .NET walkthroughs, skim through them, you'll easily be able to identify the bitmap code. All right, let's move on to the final topic for the day, and we'll highlight what you need to know for deploying your ArcObjects Visual Basic .NET application to client machines. Every client machine that runs your application is going to need a full installation of ArcGIS, including the appropriate license functionality. And this second bullet is interesting in light of one of the questions that Kelly just answered. Just as your development machine needs the ArcObjects.NET Developer Kit for its assemblies, your client machines will also need references to these same assemblies. So this goes quite in parallel to the question that we just processed about .NET assemblies. The client machines will also need the .NET framework. Newer Windows machines already have this framework installed, and you just need to be aware of the versions. The version of the framework on the client machines must match or be newer than the version of the framework on your development machine. Let's take a quick look at what we need for COM as far as the deployments are concerned. When you use the Visual Basic.NET Enterprise Setup and Deployment Wizard, that will automatically take care of registering with the operating system. Or if you're sharing assemblies among a group of friends for a more casual deployment, you can actually run regasm from the .NET command prompt to register with the operating system. While we're on the subject of deployment wizards, also remember that as you are navigating the wizard and choosing the deployment files, be sure to remove all references to stdole DLL and to the ESRI DLLs. These will already be present on the client machine, and you don't want to overwrite them. Well, that was a quick review, but a necessary one for those of you who are planning to share or sell your applications. We looked at the requirements on the client machine and reviewed what you need to do with your COM components and the Windows operating system. And now let's have Kelly see what she can do to finish off the rest of your questions.
Okay, Malia asks, if I learn VB.NET as a first-time programmer, will I have difficulty programming in VBA? No, VB.NET and VBA share a lot of the same programming concepts. Learning how to create loops and branching statements and the actual structure of the programming language are very similar between the two. So you should have no problem programming in VBA if you learn VB.NET. We have another question. Does ESRI have a plan to re-implement ArcGIS as .NET assemblies? At the current time, I'm not aware of any plans to re-implement the ArcGIS as .NET assemblies. Thankfully, Microsoft has provided us some very useful COM interop tools in order to work with these COM objects, ArcObjects, from .NET, so there's no reason to implement ArcObjects as actual .NET objects. Mike in Wisconsin asks, are there any documents describing how to fix typical ESRI object compile errors created by the upgrade wizard? No, there aren't any documents per se that go through the typical errors and how to fix them. However, one of the benefits and advantages of Visual Studio.NET is that it offers very, very descriptive error messages. You can go to the task wizard at the bottom of your screen and double-click on any of the error messages that appear, and it will take you to the line where the error message occurs. Let's go back to Sally.
Well, let's look at one question actually about using the upgrade wizard. Someone has asked, actually a number of you have asked, why I didn't demonstrate how to use the tool that comes with .NET for migrating Visual Basic applications. In fact, as I was beginning to create the demonstrations, I was planning to demonstrate the upgrade wizard. But I found that so many errors or other situations arose that I was modifying more of the code than I was bringing across. So I found that in the long run, it was actually easier for me to copy and paste code in. Now, if you do have a large volume code, you certainly could try to use the upgrade wizard for bringing in your changes. Do you have anything else, Kelly?
Looks like we have a couple more questions coming in. Rajesh wants to know, can I use C# instead of VB.NET and use ArcObjects Developer Kit? Yes, C# is another language that's supplied with the .NET Developer Kit, and it is possible to perform all the customizations that you can perform with VB.NET with C# as well. Will is asking if ArcObjects are able to link to the .NET Web Services. Yes, that is possible. From a Visual Studio .NET application, it's possible to easily consume web services. Therefore, it's possible to integrate your web services into ArcMap using .NET and ArcObjects. Let's see if we have any more questions coming in. Jack in San Jose wants to know if it's possible to debug an extension using Visual Studio .NET. Yes, this is one of the definite benefits of .NET. In VB6, one of the shortcomings was always that we couldn't debug things like extensions from VB6's development environment. In .NET, using the advanced debugging tools from the debug menu, this is possible and simple. Okay, let's go back to Sally.
Well, it looks like we're out of time. If you need some additional information, there is some good material in ArcObjects Online. Or check out some of the instructor-led training courses. For those of you who might be new to ArcObjects itself, there's a new book from ESRI Press, and there's always the Microsoft site. On behalf of ESRI and Kelly Hutchins and myself, thanks for attending.